Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 9th of May 2024. This is a military aid and equipment video for you. Quite a bit going on to discuss today. We're going to start with something that was in the news yesterday. The EU agreeing to use profits from frozen Russia's assets, or Russia's frozen assets even, to support Ukraine. Kiev wanting the full $210 billion. The EU has agreed that around $3 billion, $3.3 billion, 3 billion euros will be used annually to, if it's implemented, that's what Ukraine could receive. And this is what was announced by the Belgian presidency of the Council. EU ambassadors agreed in principle on measures concerning extraordinary revenues stemming from Russia's immobilized assets. Money will serve to support Ukraine's recovery and military defense in the context of Russian aggression. So that's leaving the door open to what it can be used for, which is, I guess, good. Not constraining that. Previously, says the Euromaidan press, the European Commission suggested allocating 90% of the funds to purchase weapons for the Ukrainian armed forces, with the remaining 10% going towards the country's reconstruction. The exact revenue will depend on accounting rates, as the frozen Russian central bank assets are held in various EU countries and currencies. Western countries are also discussing the possibility of fully confiscating these assets, but no agreement has been reached yet. Meanwhile, Hungary won't participate in NATO's long-term €100 billion fund to aid Ukraine, according to Hungarian Foreign and Trade Minister Peter Szijjártó. He called NATO's plan a crazy mission. Like, Hungary in NATO and in the EU is becoming increasingly more problematic. Now, bad news for NATO today, or at least yesterday, is that there have been elections in North Macedonia. North Macedonia is a Balkan state that is part of NATO. You might not realise. It is part of NATO, and it had elections yesterday, and it looks like the pretty right-wing parties, I need to look at the details, have had a great success there, which does not bode well, because they generally align in that region with Russia and against NATO and against the EU. So North Macedonia is an interesting little place that has key strategic value, but if that is slipping towards the Russian sphere of influence, and that is a challenge for NATO going forward. You know, NATO and the EU and the Western world need to wake up. They are woken up, I think, in the corridors of power, but generally, you know, most of the population don't realise all the chess moves that are taking place. But things are not looking good going forward. China has its tiger paws all over Europe, in the east particularly. And Russia is continuing to have effect on many of the nations in Europe or on the outskirts thereof. It's just, we need to wake up and smell the coffee. The USA is already working on new packages of military aid to Ukraine, but we're not ready to talk about the timing of their allocation, says Matthew Miller of the Biden administration. You could argue that should have been something worked on some time previously, but nonetheless, good news. They need as much stuff as they can get, and as consistently as they can get it. Britain will additionally contribute 23 million euros to the Energy Support Fund, according to the Ministry of Energy. They will be aimed at procuring equipment to repair damaged energy infrastructure, strengthen physical defences, and provide backup power. Well, that's in line. I mean, 23 million won't go too far, considering the Ukrainians need $1 billion. Well, this is, I haven't reported this yet today because this has just come out, but I said that there were some strikes last night in terms of Shahed drones. I think, I'm not aware of any missiles being shot, but 2 hydroelectric power plants were taken out of operation due to damage caused by the attack on the grids on May the 8th. That is yesterday, so last night, I presume. That's according to Ukrhydro Energo. They are complaining rightfully about they had to close 2 power plants, hydroelectric power plants. So that is not cool. Right, Petr Cech, the Czech President has said the first batch of 180,000 units of ammunition purchased as part of the Czech initiative can be delivered to Ukraine as early as June. In the future, deliveries of much larger volumes are planned, President of the Czech Republic Petr Pavel has said. There are already contracts for a further 5 or 6 figure number of rounds, he has said. German aid to Ukraine gives a little bit more meat on a bone. So this is an interview with the German ARD. It's already known that the first 180,000 shells have been contracted, and there's further contracts to be given out. He also admits that the Czech initiative is not progressing as quickly as he would have wished. This has to do with the Russian countermeasures, as they have basically revealed their cards with opening the initiative to the public. So I don't know quite what that means, but Russia might be getting involved in some of these other countries, like South Africa, Turkey, India, if that's another nation. I don't know exactly what the nations are, but if some of these nations that have been proposed as being part of this initiative, you might have Russia saying, well, we'll pay you a bit more, and getting involved because, as mentioned, when you publicize this initiative to try and get public and political support for this around the world, then you are also telling Russia what you are doing. So that is interesting to see whether how successful the Russians have been in putting a spanner in those works. Now, German aid to Ukraine says today, financed by the German government, 20 off-road vehicles worth around 550,000 euros. So that's no small amount of value there, were handed over to the explosive ordnance disposal units of the Ukrainian National Police. These are to be used in the regions on the front line. More vehicles are to be handed over in Q3 and Q4. So that's really good news there. They all look like Toyotas to me. But yeah, good stuff from the Germans, continuing to help in many, many different ways. A new pilot boat is on duty in the waters of Danube River. Danube ports. It was built in Ukraine with funding from US aid. The launch pilot boat will increase in the number of ship calls to Danube cluster. A bit of messed up English there. Its development and stable operation is one of the ministry's priorities. In other words, this will help with the Danube being used as an export hub for Ukrainian agri-produce. Ukraine has caught up with Russia in the production of UAVs similar to Shahed 131 and 136, according to General Director of Geopol. That's the state-owned defense manufacturer. That is really good news. I don't know whether it means they are ones that kind of look like that or functionally are the same or similar to the Shahed. In other words, could it be some of these plane-based ones? We've seen the Lyuty one and the UJ-22 used quite a bit. The Beaver was used quite a lot, but haven't seen them recently. The Scythe was talked about. AQ400 looks quite a cheap one, but there are all these different ones that we're seeing sort of either downed or used or ready to be used. Lots of different types of drone. Don't know quite what is being referred to here, but it's not the first time we've heard this, but I guess confirmation that the Ukrainians have really ramped up their attack drone manufacturing capacity. In addition, recent air defense supplemented by Soviet American components shot down an Iranian Shahed from a distance of 9 kilometers. We're ready to produce even more, but we are held back by lack of money. This was mentioned by Commission, where there is apparently a $10 billion shortfall of funding. They've got the industrial capacity to make an awful lot more stuff, the Ukrainians, than they presently are. And it's not a lack of labor or personnel or components or whatnot. It is a lack of money. Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis has again said that Greece cannot send its Patriot or S-300s to Ukraine. Quote, "We support Ukraine and we have a surplus of defence equipment, but this does not apply to either the Patriot or the S-300 because we need them." So that also talks to the idea that they are providing other stuff. Supposedly they were going to provide all of their old Soviet-era equipment, but they're keeping hold of the S-300s and air defence, it seems. Some Ukrainian pilots are very close to completing their training on the F-16, apparently. According to NOL reports, when the fighter jets arrive in Ukraine, the pilots will be ready for missions. According to the spokesperson for the Air Force, Ilya Yevlash, really good news there. That is some seriously good news. Lithuanian foreign minister backs sending Western military trainers to Ukraine. We heard this yesterday. This is a confirmation. Western military personnel training Ukrainian troops on the ground rather than in NATO countries would have practical advantages. Lithuanian foreign minister Gabrielis Landsbergis told The Guardian in an interview published today. Now, he is a massive supporter. He's actually done the rounds on US television. He was on Fox News, I think, expressing some great sentiments with regard to the support for Ukraine. And the Lithuanians being fine with having their troops training in Ukraine is a really significant move. As I said yesterday, if you can get some of these smaller nations like the Baltic nations having their troops in Ukraine, it won't be seen as escalatory as France doing that. And then when France comes to say do that, or another country like the UK, then actually, because the door's been opened by the Baltic nations already, or smaller nations, then it won't seem as escalatory eventually when France or other nations of that size do that. On the other hand, we've got Matteo Salvini, who's a coalition partner with Giorgia Meloni. Giorgia Meloni is the Brothers of Italy right-wing party that's in charge of Italy with two other right-wing parties. And one of those parties was headed by Silvio Berlusconi, who's a friend of Putin, and the other party headed by Matteo Salvini. Both of those really pro-Russian, yet Giorgia Meloni is positioning herself as being really pro-Ukrainian. So there's an interesting mix going on there. Now, we heard that the foreign minister, I think, or was it defense minister, I think, yesterday, saying that the Italians weren't going to send troops to Ukraine, and also that Italian weapons couldn't be used inside Russian territory. And this could represent the fact that the government is made up of a coalition of parties that on the one hand support Ukraine and on the other hand support Russia. And so you are getting some conflicting views coming out of the administration. Anyway, French aid to Ukraine says, as usual, Matteo Salvini, I do not like that man, the leader of La Liga, reacted to the recent statements of Emmanuel Macron and the former president of the Italian Council, Mario Monti, that it might be necessary to send soldiers to Ukraine. I'd not heard this from Monti, by the way, but interesting. In front of journalists in opposition to pro-Kiev policy of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. So this is very public, almost dissenting view here from deputy prime minister, deputy leader? I'm not sure. Anyway, quote, they need to be treated, said this close ally of Marine Le Pen. Those who hold this position and say it is if it were something normal, and this applies to both Macron and Monti, are dangerous. If they want to fight so much, let them go to Ukraine tomorrow. They are waiting for them. So Matteo Salvini taking a real kind of pro-Russian stance there. Now, the Verkhovna Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, has adopted a bill on mobilization of prisoners. And that is, I think, good news for getting boots on the ground. Those convicted of serious premeditated murder, rape, sexual violence or crimes against the foundations of national security will not be mobilized. So on the one hand, they are saying we're going to mobilize convicts and prisoners. And actually, we're going to, as we're going to learn in a second, people who are just going through the legal system. We are not going to see some of the worst criminals on the front line that we've seen with the Russians, and then that causes issues. They might get pardons, they then get reintegrated into society, and it all goes wrong. And also, they're not the sort of colleagues you want to be fighting with, or compatriots, comrades you want to be fighting with on the front line. The criminal cases of almost 11,000 people have been halted by Ukrainian courts because the defendants volunteered to join the army, NGL Media reported on May the 7th. This is phenomenally good news. That's 11,000 people. Now, I don't know how long this is over. Could this be since the beginning of the war, or is this just a recent phenomenon? I hope it's a recent phenomenon, because that means you've got 11,000 people just recently volunteering. So not being forced to, I don't know how, volunteering, but it's like, right, we can go through the legal processes here, and you're likely to be done for whatever it is, some kind of, I presume, minor crime, or you can volunteer to go and fight in the front line, and we'll drop this. And so that's what they're doing. And it's one of these situations where in peacetime, you'd definitely like these people to go through the rigmarole of the legal processes because you want justice to be done for them. But on the other hand, you don't really have a legal system if you don't have a country, and you don't have a country if you don't fight in a war, and if you don't fight a defensive war, and in order to fight a defensive war, you need boots on the ground. So it's this moral consequentialism, we say, which is a small evil that enables a greater good. So you'll take that hit for the greater good, and the greater good is having an army to fight a defensive war. So I see this as a necessary evil type thing, and it will hopefully provide a much greater good. Now, Parliament votes to increase fines for draft evasion as well. So this is these multiple avenues of attack or avenues of approach for the Ukrainian government to try and get as many people fighting as possible on the front line for them. You have draft evaders, and if they're not running off to a foreign country, they might be sitting in their basements, or I don't know, running off inside Ukraine to another property or to a relative's place, and putting up the fines for draft evasion might get people to sign up. I think that's unlikely. So, without boring you too much, I've written on crime and punishment in a philosophical context with regard to actually whether heaven and hell as philosophical ideas are deterrents or whether they encourage people to do things. And psychologically, with regard to harsh punishments, so in other words, if you're increasing the fine there, harsh punishments don't really affect criminal behaviour. You might think they do, but generally they don't. So something like, for example, the death penalty for doing X, Y, or Z has negligible effect on whether someone's actually going to do something. Because people have the invincibility kind of bias where you just think, well, I'm not going to get caught. So it doesn't matter whether I'll get killed or tickled. I ain't going to get caught. Now, what does affect behaviour much more is the fear of getting caught, the probability of getting caught. So, for example, if I'm going to go and steal from steal a loaf of bread from my local shop, if I think I've got a 0.01% chance of getting caught, I'm going to steal that, right? If I have that inclination. But if I have the perception that I've got a 99.99% chance of getting caught, then I'm not going to do it because it's ridiculous. I'm just going to get caught and I have to go through, the ramifications of being caught stealing a loaf of bread. But it's not the punishment that dictates whether I do or don't do that action. It's the percentage chance, in my perception, of being caught. And so what Ukraine need to concentrate a lot on, if that is true, what I've said, is actual enforcement, is these troops that go around and people don't like it, but go around collecting people that have evaded draft. That is illegal. You're going to be stuffed into a van and driven off because actually it's not a case of like, oh, you've broken the law, you've evaded draft. Oh, well, can you turn up at 11 o'clock on Friday morning to the recruitment office, and then they drive off. The reason why they have to be bundled into a van is because they've already been running away from being drafted. So it looks bad for PR, and you get like Russians saying, look at how terrible this is, they're forcing people into vans to fight in a war. Yeah, because they're draft evaders, and if you just expect them to turn up next time, they've already been evading draft for a year. What are they going to do? They're going to run off to another place. So the reality of the situation is you need to bundle these people in the back of the van. Just as if you caught a murderer on the streets, you would put handcuffs on them and put them in the back of the van and take them off to the police station. This is breaking the law of the country. And so but unfortunately, it just doesn't look good for PR. But I don't understand how else it's going to be. But the larger point being that if you invest in people having a greater probability of being caught, then that is more likely to affect whether people are voluntarily going to go to a recruitment or centre or not. It might also affect the higher probability of people leaving the country. So if you have a higher probability of being caught inside Ukraine, if you really don't want to fight in a war, then you will just try and get out of Dodge. Anyway, that's my tuppence on that topic. Then we have Colby Badwa here talking about the excess defence articles, the EDA program. I'm just going to go through a bit of a tweet where he explains that. He actually highlighted this to me, said you might want to talk about this, and I do. So the EDA is something that people think, can be used a lot more by Biden. So can President Biden send Ukraine whatever weapons he wants with this one simple trick? So it's this particular law that says actually you can send things that are deemed as excess to needs. No, he can't. So how does the EDA program actually work? This is in response to David Axe. He to Colby Badwa has an axe to grind with Forbes' David Axe. He takes umbrage to some of the things that he claims. So David Axe had written previously, on Ukraine, Republicans can't win. Joe Biden can send excess weapons, whether or not the House of Representatives likes it. Okay. I wrote 109 post thread on presidential drawdown authority, and that didn't even cover every aspect of the process. So I could write 200 tweets on EDA and still just scratch the surface. So here's a TLDR. Too long, didn't read. So the Foreign Assistance Act authorizes the transfer of EDA excess defense articles to partner countries. There are many restrictions and conditions on how these transfers can happen. The most important one, though, is that excess defense articles are statutorily defined by the FAA. They are, quote, not procured in anticipation of military assistance or sales requirements or pursuant to a military assistance or sales order, which is in excess of the approved force acquisition objective and approved force retention stock of all Department of Defense components. Goodness me. So the president cannot unilaterally declare something as excess to requirements. Acquisition objectives are public information in many cases. Congress is provided with these details annually as part of the budgeting appropriations process, so they cannot be unilaterally changed or underhanded purposes either. Note that the word expired does not appear anywhere in that definition either. Excess and expired are not synonyms. Defense articles which are expired can still be part of approved force retention stock. What that means is that things are seen as, I guess, strategically excess to requirements. Like, we've got all these types of missiles. They're still within their best before date or whatever. They haven't expired, and that's what expired means, as in, really, we should only keep these missiles for 10 years, and if we get to the 10 years, that actually we need to give it a midlife update or get rid of it. Whereas excess is more like, as I'd understand it, well, we've got 10,000 ATACMS, right? But actually, ATACMS aren't the sort of missile that's so useful anymore, or we only need like 5,000 ATACMS for what we think are going to be the particular theatres that we're going to be involved in, and actually we're moving more towards an anti-ship missile for use in the Indo-Pacific rather than ATACMS. So like 5,000 of those ATACMS, they're not expired, they're not past their sell-by date, but they're excess to requirements for how we strategically are planning our armed forces. A prime example, he's going to go and give an example. A prime example, in 2017, the Department of Defense had just unexpired 269 ATACMS in inventory, and 2,150 missiles were expired. All missiles were still in retention stock, though, even after plans to refurbish all expired missiles were cut in half to just 1,075, 2,150. The entire inventory has remained in retention stock. So this means that they had some expired missiles that were not excess. So they still had plans for those expired missiles. So it can go both ways. So whether something is expired or not has no relevance to EDA. Now, what about caps and values? EDA grants have a global cap like PDA but $500 million rather than $100 million. So what that means is that every year, without passing any laws, the US has the right to draw down $100 million worth of equipment to anywhere around the world. So, right, we've got this equipment in our stocks, a whole bunch of infantry fighting vehicles. We need to send them to Mali at the moment because something's going on in Mali. And we can do that without going to the Senate, or without going to Congress, we can do that to the tune of $100 million, and we can do that every year. That's a basic allowance every year. And for EDA, it's $500 million, which is interesting. So 5 times the presidential drawdown. Valuation of defense articles is governed by the same financial management regulations as the PDA is. The CFO Act of 1990 set the groundwork for the establishment of the federal government's current financial management practices. The executive branch cannot invent new FMRs for its own political convenience. So they can't mess around with this. Furthermore, the FAA requires that justifications be submitted to Congress for nearly all proposed EDA grants, which outline the original acquisition cost and the current depreciated value of the articles. They also have to explain why it is that the national security interest of the United States to grant the articles rather than sell them via the foreign military sales program. The statutory requirement prevents the executive branch from fabricating a current value for the articles that suits their political agenda. In other words, Biden can't just, or his administration can't just say, right, we're going to give 100 Bradleys to Ukraine just because we think they're excess and they're actually only worth $1 each. And therefore, that's only going to take $100 from the EDA budget. Well, actually, you have to show, one, that you've got good rationale for them being excess, and two, you can't just make up the value of these things. It's set down much more formally. So for these reasons, EDA is not a very suitable authority to provide Ukraine with security assistance. The vast majority of their needs are for articles which are not access to requirements. The program could be leveraged more effectively, but you can say that about every authority the Biden administration has at their disposal. They have majorly botched the execution of every single one, PDA, FMF, and especially USAI. They are all disasters, says Colby Badwell, not a fan of the Biden administration. EDA keeps getting pushed by people who don't understand security assistance law as a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. The Biden administration has never been constrained by a lack of authority to deliver security assistance to Ukraine. They have constrained themselves. They choose not to provide Ukraine the weapons being requested, despite ample authority in the Congress that has actually consistently appropriated more than they have asked for. I hope this explains things sufficiently and puts the EDA question to rest. If you ever see anyone even mention the EDA, please link them to this thread. Okay, so that's enough from there. The Russians, on the other hand, they are manufacturing Russia's aircraft manufacturer Yakovlev has circumvented sanctions, procuring $500 million worth of components from military aviation equipment since 2022, including radar and controllers. In early April 2024, the EU approved minimum penalties for sanctions violations, and yet they're still able to do that. It's really, really frustrating. Indeed, there is also the idea that, where is it? Here, it's this one. So an investigation has shown that Russian forces may use satellite systems made in Ukraine. About 22,000 Gilat Sky Edge internet communication systems were imported to Russia in 2023. The systems were manufactured at a facility in Uzhhorod in Ukraine. Now, this is, again, I would not be blaming the Ukrainians here. I've been consistent on this, which is when you see, say, for example, American or French companies having their widgets manufactured and then ending up in missiles in Russia, it's difficult to keep a handle on that because they sell it to someone else in their country who sells it to someone else. Then it goes internationally, and then it goes internationally again, and then it ends up in Kyrgyzstan and then goes across the border into Russia. And you're like, well, is that the fault of the manufacturer? No, they have no idea what the 10th person in that chain is going to do with it. Now, can they have more of an eye on what's going on? Is there more onus that can be put on manufacturers that should be put on manufacturers? I don't know, but certainly these loopholes need to be tied up. This is a case of Ukrainian, really probably quite important equipment ending up being used by the Russians, and that's really frustrating. A Russian Foreign Ministry speaker, Maria Zakharova, told reporters that if French President Emmanuel Macron sends troops to Ukraine, the Russians will consider them legitimate targets. If the French appear in the conflict zone, they will inevitably become a target for the Russian armed forces. It seems to me that Paris already has evidence of this. I mean, there are these false news stories that French troops are in Ukraine, and that's just a load of nonsense. At least not in a formal way that had been expressed. There might be like Secret Service out there, almost certainly Special Forces, out there. But yeah, Now, Russia's newest colony of Central African Republic is participating in Putin's May the 9th celebrations. If you've not been paying attention, Russia has taken over several Central African countries, and that cannon fodder will be poured into European wars. It's interesting that there are some African components to the Victory Day celebrations. And then 4 Indian citizens have been arrested on suspicion of luring Indians to join the war in Ukraine, offering them allegedly to work or study in Russia. India's Central Bureau of Investigation reported that about 35 citizens have become victims, two of whom have died. And that is, as far as I can work it out, that for the time being. I'm sure there's plenty more to say, but I've kept you too long. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.